Oops. Joe DeLeone here with Hack City. I think I butchered that opening. As usual, week 6 of college football. We've got 4 games that we're going to talk about, taping here live from the work in progress studio here at Believe. Finally got some background on. If anyone who tunes into the SEC shows sees all the white backgrounds that I've been recording on, we put up this nice background that we have here. Again, still a little bit of a work in progress, but nonetheless, I'm excited to be here talking about week 6 of college football. We've got 4 fantastic games that are coming up that deserve necessary attention. Now, we don't have like a 1 versus 5 or a 3 versus 4. We don't have any of those matchups, but we have a lot of key games that are going to help further separate who the top teams are in the country, but most importantly, the top teams in their respective conferences. Those 4 games that I want to get into, and then as usual, we'll get to any comments, anything that's dropped in at the end, we'll get to that stuff. But the 4 games that we're going to talk about today: Tennessee versus LSU, Utah versus UCLA, Texas A&M versus Alabama, and TCU versus Kansas. Now, the only one in here that I would argue doesn't have as much importance on the outcome of seasons is that Texas A&M Alabama game. That game is going to be highly watched because of the offseason uproar that we had, because of the storyline that comes into this between Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban. That, however, is not going to be a very competitive game, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. I want to kick things off with Tennessee versus LSU. Now, LSU started off the season with a rocky start. They lose to Florida State, and the resounding thought from that game is that Brian Kelly was a bad pick. It was a horrendous hire. And I was one of those people as a former Notre Dame fan, or as a Notre Dame fan, not former, still a Notre Dame fan, that was clowning on the hire. I was happy to see that Brian Kelly was failing elsewhere. He has since rallied and gotten that LSU team back on track. And most recently, they've had wins against Mississippi State, and then they had a win against Auburn this past week. That game was a little closer than I think most LSU fans would have liked, but nonetheless, an SEC victory is an SEC victory, and it has pushed them into a spot where they're now 3-1, and that they can say that they're a ranked SEC team. This game, I think, holds significantly more importance for LSU for them to win than it does for Tennessee. Tennessee has already gotten their ranked games. They've already gotten their ranked wins, rather. They've beaten Pitt. They've beaten Florida. This is just another one to throw onto the resume. This is just another one to say, we're running through these back-end ranked SEC opponents and the back-end ranked teams on our schedule. We know who Tennessee is. We know who they are. We've seen them play. What we don't know is how good can LSU be this year? How capable are they in a big-time matchup like this? The one thing that has to be discussed first, before we talk about how this matchup fills out across the board, is that Brian Kelly's inability to properly prepare his teams for important games like this. I always point to the evidence that I have as a former, I keep saying former, as a Notre Dame fan, that Brian Kelly has always brought his teams to these big matchups, and they've, at a miraculously terrible level, underperformed. There have been games where they played Georgia or Clemson where they've lost close games, but more often than not, in important games against highly ranked opponents, they have looked like shit. Now is an opportunity for Brian Kelly to at least say that he brought his team to this matchup and prepared them to play in a competitive environment, to keep this game close, to keep this in, one score, 10 points, somewhere around that range. Realistically, this is Tennessee's game to lose. We know, as I've already said, Tennessee has looked fantastic so far this season. I think front to back, outside of Alabama and Georgia, has shown that they are one of the more complete SEC teams offensively and defensively. I don't know the necessary timetable for Cedric Tillman to get back, but losing him has hampered them offensively slightly. But Hendon Hooker has ascended to a level where he deserves to be in conversation for the Heisman this season. And this game is going to be yet another opportunity for him to display his capabilities as a passer and to take over a game through the air. He and that entire offense have been lighting up opposing secondaries. We saw it against Florida. We saw it against Pitt. We've seen it in every game so far this season. They're moving the ball through the air at a level that is one of the best in the country. Again, and that's without Cedric Tillman, who's been hurt for the past few weeks. They are built to put up 40, I think, on most opponents. And LSU secondary is not anything that's particularly scary in this matchup. They lost their best defensive back last year, aside from Derek Stingley, who entered the NFL, and Eli Ricks, who is now in Alabama's secondary and not even playing that significant of a role. What concerns me for LSU in this matchup, and we've seen it has always notoriously been the case for Brian Kelly, but we're starting to see it again this year, that LSU's offense is just really slow to get going. They're very slow to get going in these games so far this season. And matching up against a very explosive, high-powered offense like Tennessee's, that is a recipe for disaster. That is a recipe for them to get boat raced right off the bat, for them to get blasted before they can even get on their feet. I anticipate this game shaping up in that direction where Tennessee gets off to a really hot start. They put points on the board. They start to look, really good. They look like they're pulling away. LSU is going to slowly climb back, and they're going to lose by 2 scores. That is the likely outcome of this game for LSU and for Tennessee. But expect and as high as I am on LSU this season, I have been higher on them since that Florida State loss, because Florida State is a lot better than we were willing to give them credit for, again, despite their recent loss that they had against Wake Forest. I have been high on LSU, but this is a perfect moment for them to get brought back to reality in a game where they're significantly overmatched when it comes to the man that they're facing off against in Hendon Hooker. The one other thing, just last point, that like Jalen Daniels has been a bit of a head scratcher so far this year, because he's looked good. He's gotten the job done, but I think that inability to get LSU's offense moving quickly and explosively early on in games is what has prevented them from pulling away at, a huge clip or staying in a shootout. I don't think that they have the capacity or the guys to play in a shootout in this game. Second game, Utah versus UCLA. This matchup brings a lot of intrigue for the Pac-12. And after watching Washington lose the way that they did to UCLA and watching USC struggle and win a close game against Oregon State, I have transitioned my thought process on who the best teams are in the Pac-12. Right now, to me, it's Oregon and it's Utah. And Utah has one of the best offenses in the country in terms of yards per game, passing offense, rushing offense, across the board. And Cam Rising has helped this team reach significantly high heights, higher levels of production than I think anybody anticipated. But what has made Utah very dangerous is the defense that is supporting an offense that is blowing out teams. Clark Phillips right now has 3 interceptions this year. I've talked about Clark Phillips and how he is a guy that can take over a game defensively. He is a lockdown type player. He makes key turnovers in games like this that they have against UCLA. While it's fun to talk about UCLA, and while it's exciting to see that Chip Kelly has turned UCLA back into a competitive team and Dorian Thompson-Robinson is embarrassing opponents, while all of that is fun, we need to be realistic here in how they looked at the start of the season. I give them credit for what they did against Washington, but against South Alabama and against Bowling Green, they have not been. Actually, was it South Alabama or was it Alabama State? No, they also played. They played South Alabama. That was the close game that they played. They have not looked as cohesive and as consistent as they possibly could be in every single game this year. The Washington game might have been a bit of an outlier, and I understand that they're undefeated. I understand that it's a difficult milestone to reach for a team to be undefeated 5 weeks into the season. But the inconsistencies legitimately concern me for the Bruins. They're also statistically one of the best defenses in the country, but comparably, the resume that they have and the teams that they've played, those best defensive performances that they've put out were against Alabama State and against Colorado. And those aren't necessarily exciting games and difficult opponents that they're facing. The most perplexing thing, too, here, and I believe that this game is at home, it's in Pasadena. Last game against Washington, that game was actually packed. It was a Friday night game. People actually showed up, and the crowd was exciting. The environment was exciting. But on every other Saturday, on every other game, that environment is nothing. It's completely docile. It is empty. It is one of the weakest home venues in the country because of the fact that people have to travel to go to that stadium, and it's not easy to get to. It's not on campus. It's like a 50-minute drive for a drunk college student to go and tailgate. It's not exactly an endeavor that is worth doing, especially when an Uber in Los Angeles is going to be like $100 to get to that stadium. So you have to remove the fact that UCLA does not have any home advantage at all in this game. Absolutely none. Zero. And while they're hot right now, they're a hot ticket, they're a hot name to talk about. Utah has actually proven the level of dominance that they have. They have proven and shown how freaking good that they can be. I don't think that this is going to be Utah blowing them out. That's not exactly at all where I'm getting at here. But Utah has actually played in difficult matchups this season. And I believe that, God, this chair sucks. I believe that Utah wins this game handedly, but not by a significant sum. Moving on to game 3 here, Texas A&M versus Alabama. And I said this earlier. This game has a lot of buzz behind it because of the offseason antics that happened with Nick Saban calling out the NIL deals that went towards recruiting the Texas A&M recruiting class this past cycle, the outrageous press conference that happened with Jimbo Fisher afterwards, and two guys that were previously on the same coaching staff now having bad blood, and apparently that might have been squashed. We all know that the 24-point line in this game is very likely to happen for Alabama. We all know that it is very likely that Alabama can win this game by more than 24 points. Texas A&M has the worst offense statistically in the SEC this year. Their offensive line, and I didn't know this fully, I didn't fully rationalize this until I read this. They have 3 sophomores and a freshman on their offensive line going up against one of the best, if not the best, actually not the best, Georgia has the best, but one of the best defensive fronts in the country led by Will Anderson. That is a horrible matchup for a struggling, a sputtering Texas A&M offense to have to deal with that. And Max Johnson, props to him that he has stepped into that situation and kept Texas A&M afloat. He's kept them afloat. He has not brought them to a new level of ascension. He has not taken them to that next step, but he has kept them afloat. He has done enough to keep them on schedule. But we all know that Max Johnson is not the guy that is going to win the game against Alabama. Now, the wrench that gets thrown into this matchup is if Bryce Young plays in this game. A lot of people, I think it's very easy to say, no Bryce Young, no Heisman winning quarterback. Your offense isn't going to do as good. You're playing against a really good secondary. You're going to struggle in this game. But we all saw what Jalen Milroe did last week. We all saw what he did. I believe from what I looked at today that Bryce is currently is questionable to play. Part of me wonders if there is any concern or uncertainty on his injury if Nick Saban doesn't just say we trust Jalen, we're going to go with Jalen. He should trust Jalen. And what we saw last week against Arkansas, he steps into the game. He has a bunch of explosive runs. He adds another layer to the run game. It almost felt like, and I said this on the reaction show that I did, it almost felt like Alabama's offense had a different dimension to it that it doesn't have with Bryce Young. Now, Bryce Young's a better quarterback. That's not to be debated. But with issues at receiver and receiver depth and issues of determining who is the go-to guy, who can they rely on? It has been different faces each week that they have gone to. And being able to run the ball and have like a dynamic attack of Jalen Milroe and Jahmyr Gibbs has made that offense very, very dangerous. Not more dangerous than it is without Bryce Young, but it is still extremely dangerous to deal with. There shouldn't be any concern. And I think if Jalen Milroe starts, you shouldn't like assume that they're not going to still cover by 24 points. We are starting to watch Alabama reach its stride while Texas A&M is starting to fall into a ditch and completely collapse and fall apart. This is going to be a blowout. This is going to be a messy game between Texas A&M and Alabama. And I think that Nick Saban doesn't care about any of the offseason nonsense. Jimbo might be coming into this game trying to prove a point. But after last year, we know that Nick Saban is a head coach that is seeking revenge and is going to want to prove a point in a matchup like this. Now, the last game that is, getting a lot of buzz and one that I am excited to watch. It is going to be the destination for College Game Day. Kansas versus TCU. I'm excited that Kansas is now ranked, and they're very deserving of this being where College Game Day is headed. Kansas has proven to us that they are capable of competing for the Big 12. And right now, these are the two remaining undefeated teams in the Big 12. Across the board, while there's other teams that are going to be in contention to win the conference, like it's still not impossible for Kansas State. It's not even impossible for Oklahoma. Texas is still, there are so many different teams that are still capable of winning the conference. But we now get to see that these two unexpected teams with relatively new coaches, Sonny Dykes' first year, Lance Leipold in his second year, to show off and show that, different teams can win the conference. It doesn't have to be Oklahoma every single year. It doesn't have to be. This game is going to come down to a battle between two very highly athletic quarterbacks, Max Duggan and Jalen Daniels. I have spoken so highly of Jalen Daniels so far this year and what he's done and the way that he's played and the things that he has flashed as a starter. Jalen Daniels brings not only athleticism as a runner, but we've seen the touch, the timing as a passer. He has been fantastic so far this season, and he is somebody who I don't think it's a stretch to say, if they continue the streak of wins that they've had, deserves to be in the conversation for the Heisman. He deserves to at least be standing up there at the end of the season as one of the finalists for the award. Him facing off against Max Duggan, I think is like, a lot of people are overhyping Max Duggan and what he's done for TCU. I understand that he currently has one of the top QBRs, if not the best quarterback rating in the country, which I believe is arbitrary. To see that who they've played against and Oklahoma's defense looked like shit last week, completely unprepared. Comparing these two quarterbacks in this matchup that they have, I 10 times out of 10 am taking Jalen Daniels. Jalen Daniels is the better quarterback between the two of them. I think that if I'm putting the game on the shoulders of somebody to win the game, I'm picking Jalen Daniels. To me, Max Duggan does enough to keep them like their offensive ahead of schedule and to keep them moving. And he played the game of his life last week. Is it repeatable? No. He was taking advantage of an opportunity against a defense that can't compete against athletic quarterbacks, that doesn't have any idea how to contain them. We saw that with Adrian Martinez the week before, who I have firmly said is not a good quarterback. Max Duggan, very, very similar. What makes me confident in this matchup for Kansas is that they're starting to ascend towards their full capabilities defensively. The game that they had against Iowa State and how low of a score that they held them to is proof that they're getting better on a weekly basis. Rich Miller, who's leading that group, who is, I think, like a sixth-year guy. He's been around Leipold. He was previously a Buffalo transfer, and he followed Leipold there. They're starting to get progressively better. And I think that this is going to be another week where they're not going to keep TCU completely under wraps. But in this matchup, they're progressively getting better and better. This is going to be another week where they improve and they step up to the occasion. This isn't their first real test. I think that, or this is their first real test, rather. Let me rephrase that. But it is not their most difficult matchup that they have. They have much more harder matchups that they have towards the end of the season. We've got one comment here from, and I totally agree that if, depending on how Daniels plays in this game, is going to determine if he deserves to be in that Heisman conversation. Like, this is his first opportunity to prove that he deserves to be in that conversation. Like, he's already proving it, but to win a ranked matchup adds to that fold. It adds to the great season that he's had so far. All right, I think that's a great note to wrap us up on. 4 games to watch for this weekend. Thanks for anyone who did hop in, and for those that were commenting. We'll be back Sunday, typical time that we usually do our recaps. But thanks for anyone who did hop in. If you're watching the replay, drop a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. We'll be back with more.